We spend a lot of time thinking, yet do we really spend that much time thinking about how we should think? Some people spend no time thinking, so they really should spend time thinking about how to think. But it brings us to this point of what frameworks exist to structure thought, and how can that be turned from thought into a great decision making? I'm going to talk through a bunch of different frameworks today, some that I like to use, one that I came to myself, and just kind of walk through these frameworks of thinking to help structure thought and kind of show how I think and derive and come to derive conclusions and come to decisions and some decision making processes I use. But for starters, there's a good even there's a good preliminary question, which is what does one even think about? When you start thinking about something that is not understood or needs a better decision, or maybe a decision needs to be made, or needs better understanding, and maybe a decision needs to be made, it essentially comes down to this idea of processing information. And through the course of my life, I've come to a lot of decisions, some ends where I've been on both ends of the spectrum, being that I've made hyper rational decisions, extremely logical, and then some relying solely on intuition, sort of what some might call a gut feeling. So I've come to, sort of a variety of ways to actually think and on something, and also rely on some predecessors and how they think and their frameworks. So just remember that when we think, we're processing information to come to a better understanding for either a decision or to apply that information, that conclusion in some instance that lets us usually make a decision or apply that information in some manner. Now, one way to think is technique to think is from an extremely well-known physicist who became a sort of public figure named Richard Feynman. Now, a technique that he had was that one doesn't fully know or understand something until they could simply explain it. So before this video, I didn't really know the exacts of this technique, but I do agree on some levels and have tried this myself. Like if I'm teaching myself a topic, sometimes I'll speak out loud to no one and probably seem like a complete loon, but I'll speak out loud to no one. Sometimes while I'm walking my dog, I have my AirPods in. I'll talk to my dog, or I'll make it seem like I'm on the phone, and I'll essentially try to explain it as simply as possible. And this is, in a way, teaching to yourself until you get to a point where you can explain it so simply that you could teach it to someone else. So Feynman's technique is 4 simple steps. You choose a concept, right? The information you're thinking about. Step 2 is you teach it to someone. 3, through that teaching, you identify gaps in your knowledge. And then 4, you refine and simplify your knowledge. Now, I used to do a lot of research around like blockchains and cryptocurrencies, and I created videos around it precisely for step 2 and 3, because by teaching it to someone, you understand where you have gaps in your understanding. So particularly when it comes to very technical concepts, I find it helpful to try and teach it to someone, because then when they ask questions, or when when the way you're explaining it is honestly not even understandable to yourself, then you know that there's more research that you need to do. And I really do think being able to teach somebody is a strong way to think. It really forces you to think about how something works and reinforces it, because the pressure to that teaching, or let's say posting content, creates. And that's also why I'm a champion for people who want to create content, even if there's no intention to get popular of doing so. Create content to learn something yourself, right? Like you start teaching content about something you're interested in and just post it, and it helps you kind of reinforce that pressure to identify gaps in your knowledge, right? And then in sort of Feynman's technique, you refine and simplify the knowledge and keep moving forward. Now, I don't think this is fully the answer, though. If you're unable to teach it, I don't think that technically means you don't know it. Like there are some people who might maybe like teaching a skill or teaching a concept is different than having a knowing of a concept. Like maybe It may not be thought about enough to be explicitly articulate, but maybe there's almost an intuitive knowing and understanding. And maybe by forcing yourself to teaching it, you're able to speak about that knowing and understanding. But that's not to say that you don't know or you don't understand. So that brings me to this way of thinking that I came up with myself, and I call it learning down to the atom, up to God. Now, the basis of the idea is simple. You try to understand how things function materially down to the atoms firing, and then you take that all the way up to the metaphysical and philosophical implementation of that concept, hence down to the atom, up to God. Now, I kind of like these concepts. I kind of like using this on concepts that are nebulous and very wide reaching and large, because it really helps you narrow down this very, very big idea into its very small material parts, but then also into its philosophical implementation. Now, an example will really, I think, drive this point home. So I use this technique to understand, for example, the internet. So let me give you that example of how you would understand something down to the atom and up to God. And for those, excuse me if there are some intricacies maybe I'm not fully grasping, but I think I do have it from my understanding of the internet. So accessing the internet really is simply electrons and photons firing across the country, and in some cases the globe, being translated into electrons that are that are fired in a pattern of clicks so that they could send a code which translates into the information displayed for whatever the request from the internet was. So at a higher level, let's say, when you put a request in on your computer on the internet, you are, as you're typing words, your specifically the motherboard is decoding the electric signals into ones and zeros, and they're translated through the GPU to display information. And when that information is displayed and a request is sent, right, you press that enter button, enter, and I'll break this down to the atom, right? The enter then translates into a sequence of it translates into software, into code, and then that code is compiled to its lowest level, which is the ones and zeros. The ones and zeros are electrons that trigger up and down onto a motherboard, or onto the chips on the motherboard, and that puts that and then sends a signal, or it sends a request, right? So you are sending a request, right? And that how the internet runs is when the request is sent, those electrical signals go to are routed to a router, and that information is transmitted into light because it's faster than electric signals. So light is pinged across cords that jump between cords and wireless signals until that information reaches the server the request is going to. And then those light signals are sent back, translated back into your computer. And where those requests go to are typically hosted by the Amazons, Googles, Microsofts, right? The data centers. And that's also why if you go to a foreign site, it takes longer because the light signals have to go across the ocean. And if you don't believe me, you could look it up. There are internet cables on the ocean floor. And right, down to the sort of quantum particle. That's how the internet works. Now, okay, I think I got that relatively right. Like I think I probably could have refined that, right? I'm kind of just talking off the top here. If I sat down to write it out completely, I think I would be able to refine it to maybe more precise. So this really helps you understand what's going on. So when you're typing when I'm typing on my computer, I now know that when I'm pressing on the keyboard, I know what is happening into my computer. And then when I click that enter button and send a request to go to a website, I know what is being transmitted and where it's being transmitted to and how that information is processed on my screen. Now, when I say up to God, right, this is the philosophical implementation of the internet. So we could ask a question, right? When I send a request to a server to get that information, I'm a client. That's sort of the IT terms. I'm a client and I'm sending a request to a server. But why are all clients not also servers, right? In fact, this is exactly what a blockchain aims to achieve. It's full decentralization. But why have we not implemented the internet fully decentralized? Well, it's at the slight cost of efficiency, at least for now, right? Like there's some technical implementations in that people claim blockchains could do to make them faster than the current implementation. But that aside, it's at the cost of efficiency. So philosophically, you can ask yourself, why have we implemented the internet in the way we have? Well, it's because we have this optimal balance of efficiency, right? The true American Western way, so that we can gain maximum efficiency and benefit, but without losing full freedom. The trade-off is that the servers are hosted by large providers because there's centralization needed for the speeds that we have, but and there's of course with the centralization of data centers, there's a lot more benefit than merely speed. There's a lot that can be offered by those data centers. And of course, there are more options than just, the oligopoly, but it is relatively limited to the data center oligopoly. But the trade-off is that we do have maximum efficiency by not forfeiting full freedom. So you see, there's sort of this. There's now the to come to that understanding. There was a lot of research required there, right? Like I needed to kind of understand at its lowest level, bring it all the way up into how it is philosophically implemented. And by understanding these two, like, it's almost like you can almost think of it as like a left brain understanding and a right brain understanding. Like you give your left brain the most logical, coherent, material understanding, and then you give your right brain the kind of creative, philosophical implementation, and it that opens up the sort of creative mindset because it allows you to play around with, okay, well, how could the internet have been implemented in a different way, and why did we choose the way that we did? And I find that by learning that way, when you have a really solid understanding of a concept down to the atom and up to God, it allows your brain to fire across channels, right? Like your left brain has a strong understanding and so does your right. And sometimes that unlocks a lot of sort of creative, almost like, creative, understanding or creative firing, that ideas that you may not have come to without that understanding. Now, there's another way to think that I'm not going to go too deep into because I'm not fully researched on it, but this is, the Nobel Prize winners, Daniel Kahneman, oh man, and his co-author. The name is slipping me right now. Yeah, it's Daniel Kahneman, and I forget the co-author's name, but you can look it up in their book Thinking Fast and Slow. They won the Nobel Prize for it. And the idea is that there are two types of thinking and knowing. And in the book, I read this. I read a part of it a while ago, but they really go into biases that people fall into and how it sort of how it hurts decision making because they think they're making the right decision, but they're essentially in the wrong category of thinking type. So the proper way to use this category is essentially, right, thinking fast and slow. There are two categorical systems of thinking in this framework. The system one are the fast, automatic, frequent, emotional, stereotypic, unconscious kind of decisions. Right? So like examples of things that system one is good at doing: determine that an object is at a greater distance than another, localize the source of a specific sound, display disgust when seeing a gruesome image, right? Basic arithmetic, like 2 + 2. driving a car on an empty road is another one, right? Like sometimes this is one that a lot of people could relate to, right? After you map a route to work, sometimes you arrive at work in the car and you think back like, whoa, how did I just get here? After you've driven on, a path for a really long time. And system two is slow, effortful, infrequent, calculating, very conscious decisions. So, like things that system two can do: prepare for the start of a sprint, look for a person with a particular feature, sustain a faster than normal walking rate, right? Like you need to put in conscious effort to do this. Now, like I said, I'm not fully researched on this, but the idea is you categorize whether something is system one or system two, and then you enact based on which one it is. So now that we thought about the sort of structure of thought, let's think about, okay, once you've thought about something, how do you make a decision, right? How do you think about something and then take it into the decision-making process? Now, when I used to work in the corporate world before I, took my leap to write fiction, I was studying some frameworks, and honestly, my favorite came from Jeff Bezos. He has this framework that he places on a 2x2 grid, and that grid is essentially on the x-axis is consequentiality, and the y-axis is consequentiality, and the x-axis is irreversibility. So the idea is if something is very low consequence and highly reversible, so you could easily reverse it and the consequence of the decision is super low, then you should just decide fast, right? Like, and this is what falls into the bottom left grid. Now, if it's in this decide fast category, I always take two approaches. If it could quickly be deduced logically, I'll have a quick think session. But for the most part, I go for the intuitive feeling and make the decision. Like, these are the things you shouldn't obsess about. And I think the story goes Jeff Bezos came to this because he realized in the early days of Amazon that people were getting hung up on these fast decisions, and he essentially empowered them to just make the decision. And if it was wrong, then reverse it later. Right, especially if it's low consequence. So good idea, right? Like I'm building my writer's website right now, my author website, and there's this decision that I came to, like what color scheme should I have on my website? Now, I understand a color might evoke a certain feeling and a certain vibe of a website, and it could be off-putting, if there's the wrong color, and it could really attract the right audience if it's the right one. But the consequence is relatively low. I'm a new author, and to the extent that I get to a point where I blow up really big, I can always change it. It's super reversible, and the impact is really low right now. So in that case, how I made my decision, right? I either do an intuitive feeling. I literally, I'll do something like this. I'll ask myself the question, and I'll just see what arises in my mind, and then I just implement it. And if it feels right, I just go and move on, because getting hung up about that is, it's not super consequential. But if you wanted to, go the logical route, you could go to color psychology wheel or something and sort of decide what kind of feeling you want to evoke on your website. Now, in the top right corner of that grid are decisions that are extremely irreversible and very consequential. Now, these are the kinds of decisions these are like the large strategic decisions about where a project goes, for example, or like a strategy or a vision somebody sets for their life. Let's say, what do you want your life to serve? Like, that's not something you should come to overnight. So whenever I'm in that top right category, for me, I need to pass 3 tests. Essentially, it absolutely must pass the intuitive test. Now, when people say intuitive, right, like, what does that mean? For me, it really means dreams, and if it's really consequential, then sometimes synchronicities do appear. And if the dreams say no, it's a no for me. Like there's to me, intuition trumps all in the decide in the slow in the slow decision category. Now, if it passes intuition, then I start thinking about it. Now, if logically it makes sense, great. Then I feel if there's any outstanding emotionality towards it, which is different than the intuition, right? Do I have a healthy anxiety about the decision? If so, can that healthy anxiety be resolved, or is there something else that needs to happen before it can? And then I will work on resolving that emotion, if possible, before I make that decision. So, one sort of idea or one example that comes to mind is when I commit to a project, when I commit to my next novel, I take a slow approach to making that decision, because essentially I'm committing my next, you know, 8 to 12 months to that project. Now, of the thing with like that example, I could always stop in the middle of it and then come back, but I do find it's really hard to come back if I've started, or if I stop in the middle of it. So I really do commit to a project once I really do commit to I try to take the slow decision making approach when I'm choosing my next novel. And so long as it passes into intuition, logic, and emotional test, then I know I have the green light on the decision. And everyone, that is all for today. I hope that that was helpful for you. And as always, thanks for watching. I hope you're enjoying these videos. If you are, if you made it here, please drop a like. Try and help signal to others that this is something worth their while. And please subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed. Thank you for watching, and hope to see you again, folks. All right, take care.